Hi everyone again. So yeah, I was super excited. I am still super excited about this upcoming talk by Joanneke Weerdmester and Owen Harris. We have heard Joanneke talk about mental health in a previous webinar, and she kindly agreed to come onto the Waterkant Festival as well to talk about her project that she's been doing with Owen Harris. And I won't talk too much. I'll just hand over to them, who'll be giving you great presentations. So I'll shut up now and hand over to the two stars of the show. All right. Cheers.
All right. Hello. Thank you all for joining us today. Hope we have a nice session in the next couple of minutes. I think Owen is going to start us off with the first talk, and then after that, I will take over and share a bit more about my specific work as well. So yeah, cool. Owen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. My name is Owen Harris. I am a game designer and virtual reality designer. I'm from Ireland. I'm currently living in Canada. I have not ever done a Zoom conference presentation before, so this is a strange and new and slightly scary experience for me. Hopefully this will all work relatively smoothly. I'll switch over to my slides in a moment, but as way of introduction, I'll say that like my own passions and my own work lies in the realm of the intersection between science, well-being, and playfulness. And it's playfulness that I'll be talking about today, mostly while illustrating some of the projects that I work on, including the main focus being the project that I work on with Joanneke and my collaborator, Nikki Smit, over in the Netherlands, which is deep an intervention, a virtual reality intervention for anxiety, depression, and anger issues. So I'm going to try and share my screen, and if people let me know that it works, that would be swell. Is that working there? I have it open in another window, but there's a slight lag, so I can't quite see yet. Okay, that appears to be working. So sorry for the delay. So as I said, I'm a virtual reality and game designer with a focus on science, well-being, and playfulness, and it's playfulness that I'll be talking about mostly today. Being a human is really hard. Not all the time, but sometimes. We are living in a society under late capitalism with massive inequality, prejudice, post-colonialism, racism. We're all also aware of the fact that we're all going to die, and everybody we love is going to die, and everything that we love, we're going to lose. These things are challenging, and it would be challenging at any time, but 2020 is particularly challenging. Not only are we living through a pandemic and long periods of isolation, but we've also had laid bare before us the horrifying conditions of racism that so many of our brothers and sisters and siblings all over the planet are living under. Of course, they've been experiencing this their whole lives, and it's now more of us are getting to see it and understand it. But even within this time, I think playfulness is incredibly important and playfulness is essential. I'm not suggesting that playfulness is the solution to all of these problems, but I think it's part of the tapestry of the solution. I think we need to apply not only our anger and our ingenuity and our passion and our motivation to solve the massive problems that we're dealing with at the moment, but playfulness needs to be a part of that as well. I'm going to talk about some of my projects that I work on that kind of embody on different levels that incorporation of playfulness and large problems that our planet faces. The first project that I'm going to talk about is Project Thea. Project Thea addresses cancer, specifically breast cancer. We all know that cancer is a scourge and a challenge upon our species that rips families apart, shortens lives, and causes great amounts of pain. Project Thea focuses specifically on breast cancer. In the West, at least, breast cancer is a highly treatable condition. If we catch it early and on time, the survival rates are extremely high. However, there are problems if the cancer is to return for a second or a third time, which it can do in unpredictable and aggressive ways. We don't understand quite yet why some people's cancer never returns and other people's returns in these complicated ways. And this project seeks to address that question. My team is a small part of a much larger project called the IMAX-T project. What we do is we remove real tumors from patients. We section them into tiny, tiny slices. We image them with a number of different technologies. We get the position, shape, and size of all of the different cells in that tumor, as well as their genetic profile, the different genes that exist within them. And then what my team does is we rebuild all of that information inside a virtual reality lab where we can do complex genetic analysis on these tumors in a hope to answer some of the questions such as why does a cancer return? And perhaps more critically, in what way will it return? We hope that this project will lead to scenarios in the future whereby somebody having been cleared of cancer, they'll be able to look at that tumor from a genetic perspective in 3 dimensions in virtual reality, and the physician will be able to say, okay, I see with this kind of structure and this kind of genetic profile, if your cancer was to return, we think it would happen in the blood. So what we're going to do is you're going to come in every 6 months to a year for a blood test, and if it happens, we're going to be ready and we're going to have a plan of action. This is a project with massive implications to extend life and to give people extra time together, to give people extra health. It's incredibly serious. I also want to mention that this project is funded by Cancer Research UK as part of the Grand Challenge program. As I was saying, the impact of this project is potentially huge, and it couldn't be more serious. But yet within that, there is space for playful design. We must design the lab for these scientists, the place where they'll spend hours upon hours doing these investigations and these analyses, coming up with these theories and information that have wide-ranging impacts for specific patients as well as for the field of cancer as a whole. We employ playfulness to make the space pleasant, to make the space intuitive, to make the space a nice place to do your work. If people are going to spend hours and hours in here, it's important for us that they enjoy themselves, and that at times it's even, pleasant and nice to use. This is kind of on the smaller side of playfulness being brought into a serious project, but I think it's an important one anyway. I also develop a range of party games. These games don't take place in virtual reality, but rather they take place in the real world. I love this kind of work because sometimes these things will only be deployed once or twice. It'll only be experienced by a few people, maybe never again. There's massive room for failure. But the topics that we can explore are really, really interesting and really, really important for our whole species. Topics such as consent or connection, communication, pleasure, touch, All of these things can be explored safely in these kind of party games. And it's like, what these games remind me of is that, like, games themselves, like as an ancient human art form and tool, became part of our culture so that we could tackle massive problems. I believe Joanneke is going to speak more about that. But the main thing I'm going to talk about today is my work with Joanneke and Nikki Smith on DEEP. Hopefully this will run. DEEP is an underwater virtual reality experience that is controlled by breathing. It started off as an art project that myself and Nikki were working on. We brought it to art galleries and festivals and play spaces, but this was a thing that was really just meant to illustrate some of the playful power of virtual reality and how we could interact with it in novel ways. However, after we've been working on the project for about 2 years, we were approached by some scientists who said they wanted to investigate its efficacy as an intervention for anxiety and depression, particularly in teenagers. We were delighted to be able to do this work, and it's been really exciting for us to collaborate with them on this. I'm going to let this trailer play a little more so you can see more of the visuals of DEEP. Myself and Nikki have been working on this game for many years now, and it's been really exciting to work like so closely at this intersection that we're both so passionate about creating these playful experiences that can be deeply helpful to people, that are deeply pleasurable to inhabit, but are also validated by science, and we can clearly see that it's having a good impact on people. I'm going to talk for a moment about where DEEP came from. DEEP is a project that's very close to my heart. I was going through a period of fairly intense depression and a general sense of massive overwhelmedness. Every day felt like it was just this constant emergency. I'm sure there's some people who are watching that can relate to that or have had experiences like that. That challenges were just mounting up, thing after thing after thing, and every day felt like I was kind of sucked into it, shot through these kind of chaotic feelings and tasks and pressures, and then spat out the other end, incredibly tired and drained. And I really wanted to make a little space for myself that could kind of interrupt that flow. So when virtual reality, this wave of virtual reality first launched with the Oculus Rift Kickstarter, I started building little meditation chambers for myself, star fields, underwater spaces, stuff that I was kind of passionate about. And I became curious about the possibility of bringing in my breathing exercises that I've been using for many years to regulate my own anxiety into that space. Breathing exercises, I'm sure, is something that many of you who are watching or listening have experimented with or played with. For me, this has been a really, really powerful way to regulate my own anxieties and kind of general mental health challenges. It doesn't fix the problem, of course, but it kind of brings me from, you know, an 8 down to a 6 or a 6 down to a 4, and it just makes things a bit more manageable. If you're feeling that way today, you know, and I know we're all going through so much stuff at the moment globally, I invite you to synchronize with this wonderful animation that Nikki made. And this is part of the way that our game works. The world mirrors your breathing back to you. As you breathe in and out, the space around you lights up, the plants grow and dance, the fish move in sync with you. And more than that, in the real game, your breath actually controls your movement. As you breathe in, you move up in the world, and as you exhale, you slowly float down. And you drift through this very pleasant, psychedelic, alien, nurturing world that, to me at least, is one of my absolutely favorite places to spend time. Deep has been shown all over the world. It's been shown on every continent except for South America. If anybody on South America would like to show it, I would really, really like that, so that we can have total global coverage. But much more exciting than that has been our work with our wonderful team of scientists. Joanneke will be speaking in a moment. Having a chance to deploy this work at the kind of front lines of mental health has been something that I never really expected, a place where I never expected this project to go. And it's so surprising and wonderful and validating to see these playful assumptions played out to be true and valuable. I'm going to speak for a moment about some of the next things that we're going to be doing with Deep. And then Joanneke is going to talk to you about the science side of things. Oh yes, this is my slide for the future. This is a really interesting kind of art movement in sci-fi at the moment called solar punk, which I've been getting really into it with this kind of utopian vision of the future, and it's kind of alternative to cyberpunk dystopia that we're living right now. Anyway, one of our first new partners is the NHS, the National Health Service over in the UK. We're in discussions with them at the moment to partner around a number of different areas that Deep will be deployed. One of them is in PTSD cases where patients are emerging from medically induced comas. We didn't know this going in, but we've found out that while people are in medically induced comas, they still retain their sense of hearing. And going through all of these stressful experiences of already being very sick and being in an incredibly stressful environment, we have a hospital where people are very ill and dying around them, they're having these incredibly vivid dreams, and at the same time, they're hearing all of these sounds. It turns out that the hydraulic suspension of a bus that brings people around cities and towns sounds incredibly like a ventilator. And people who are coming out of these medically induced comas can be incredibly triggered by these sounds. We're hoping to develop a version of Deep that will allow people to explore these PTSD audio triggers in a safe way that will allow them to de-escalate this PTSD. It's also going to be used in general stress and anxiety, in this case for the frontline healthcare workers, the people who are dealing with very, very challenging jobs under very, very challenging conditions. And on top of that, at the moment, obviously they're dealing with that in a pandemic. They're under-resourced, and it's an incredibly challenging scenario for them. Deep has been deployed in their essentially their staff room as a way for them to take a break from the incredibly challenging things they're living in the ICU at the moment. And already that's already happening, and we've got a great response from that so far. We're also going to be working with the Brave Research Center in the US. These are the folks who did the neuroscience studies on long-term meditators, and we're really, really excited to be working with them. They're going to be studying the effects of Deep on PTSD teens with post-traumatic stress disorder, and if it can be effectively deployed there. I'm really excited about that. But the main thing that we're working on at the moment for the first time is having a home version of Deep. A version of Deep on the Oculus Quest that can be used by anybody who has that system, that can be used at home. And in response to the global pandemic and the lockdown that's happening, we've been folding in features so that multiple people can inhabit the same space at the same time and have experiences where they can breathe together with friends or strangers and have a sense of connection and intimacy, even with all of the distance that we're feeling at the moment. So I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm going to be around for doing questions and answers at the end, and I'll have a few words to say at the end as well. Thanks very much.
All right, then I guess I'll take over from here, and I'm going to start trying to share my screen. Let's see if that's gonna work out. Yeah, can everyone see the screen right now? I think it works. At least it works for me. Okay, so yeah, as Owen mentioned, my name is Joanneke Weerdmeester, and I am a PhD candidate from the Radboud University in the Netherlands. And there I work in the Games for Emotional and Mental Health lab, which tests and develops games to help youth with their mental health issues. And my specific focus of research is about biofeedback video games for anxiety regulation. One example of which is Deep, which is what links Owen and me together. And within this lab, we mostly focus on internalizing problems. And that is because anxiety is one of the most common forms of psychopathology among youth. So for global prevalence rates are estimated that about 25% of young people are diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And it's suspected that a large percentage are also suffering from anxiety symptoms, but that are still undiagnosed. And also a large percentage of these young people also, in addition to the anxiety, also suffer from depression symptoms. So you can imagine that this is a huge burden on these young people, but it's also a huge burden on the global healthcare system. Luckily, anxiety in general is fairly well treatable. There are many evidence-based programs available, one of which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the most known ones. There is, however, still an issue, and that is that these programs still don't work for everyone, or they don't work as well as we want them to. An additional issue is that for many of these youth, they don't really receive the treatment that they need. And this can be due to various barriers associated with conventional treatment programs, such as a lack of engagement, lack of adherence, high costs, accessibility, and a stigma that is often still related to seeking help for your mental health issues. So in recent years, we've seen that there's an enormous rise in the development of digital forms of mental health treatment, so-called e-mental health programs. And this was all kind of started from the perspective that we could use technology to improve the appeal and the effectiveness, the costs, and the reach of mental health interventions. And there have been numerous reviews and meta-analysis since those developments started. But unfortunately, these show us that the promise of these digital mental health interventions have not really been realized yet, especially for youth. So when we look at the effectiveness, they are in general still relatively low. And some specific issues have been identified in there, such as still a lack of adherence and engagement, but also a lack of personalization to individual needs. So even though these issues are addressed, these reviews and meta-analysis usually don't really show us any clear guidelines of how we can improve upon these programs. But I'll share the framework that we in the Games for Emotional Health, Mental Health Lab, have adopted to address these issues. And that all started out from the developmental perspective of the importance of play. So we know that play is essential for our social and emotional development. So children learn very important skills through play, such as emotion regulation, problem solving, conflict resolution, coping with failure, etc. But of course, the environments of play have changed a bit over in recent years, and they've moved more and more to digital spaces. And that is why in the lab we started looking at video games to see if we could harness the benefits from video games for treatment. And one of the most important reasons for that, that we started looking at video games, is that games are already inherently motivating and engaging for children. So if we can use them in some way in treatment, then we can potentially increase this adherence and make it a more meaningful and pleasant experience. In addition, video games can provide an ideal context to practice new skills, because they're all designed in such a way that you want to keep trying and you want to keep improving, for instance, until you reach that next level. In general, they're also more accessible than conventional treatment programs, and they may have a lower cognitive load than conventional treatment programs, because they're usually less information heavy and less didactic. It's more, for instance, based on trial and error. In addition, using video games could potentially lower the barrier for young individuals to seek help for their mental health issues. So they might be able be more willing to seek help for their mental health issues if it's in the form of a video game. And also there's a lot of potential for personalization. So one example, for instance, of something that is already present in most games is dynamic difficulty adaptation, which means that the game adapts to the current level of mastery of the player. And this avoids that people become either too frustrated or that they become too bored. And I think we can learn a very important lesson from this and use it in treatment. So within the GEMH-lab, we really looked at these games and technological applications, and we wanted to see whether we could use this to transform how mental health interventions are designed, delivered, and experienced. And as you can see here in this tree, the root of everything that we do always starts from scientific and therapeutic principles. So what do we know from science and from therapy that works well to address certain mental health issues? But another core thing that is, it's part of all of the projects and all of the games that we develop is that we really want to create a good balance between art and science, because we want to avoid the same pitfalls that many of these mental health programs have fallen into, that it will just become a conventional program in a digital format, maybe with some game mechanics sprinkled on top. We want to really avoid the so-called chocolate-covered broccoli effect, because we know that children really won't engage with that. So in order to do this, we really need a close-knit collaboration with designers and artists, because they are able to help us to make it these experiences into a meaningful experience that can trigger genuine emotion. And this is really necessary in order to reach lasting and adaptive changes in our mental health. So yeah, we work very closely together with designers and artists, but we also work together with, for instance, care partners, commercial partners, and young people themselves as much as possible. So when talking about all of this potential of technology and the potential of video games, I want to kind of address still a concern that is still pervasive, which is that there is also a concern that with increasing technology, we will become more disconnected from ourselves and others, and that we will retreat in our own virtual spaces, which may negatively influence our well-being. Well, first of all, this concern is not really new, because with all different forms of media, this has always come up, and also with all technological developments, these issues are brought up. And of course, it's still a genuine concern to keep in mind. However, when I look at the future of mental health treatment and how we can use technology to facilitate our well-being, I see quite the opposite for the future. So already when you look at current developments that are happening in technological innovation spaces, you see that virtual spaces are becoming increasingly social and interactive. And the real and digital world blend together more and more. And we are able to share these spaces with others. And in addition, we see that there's also an uprise in more accessible biosensors and things like Fitbits and smartwatches, which we can use to measure and give feedback on people's physical state and mental well-being. And we can use data from these things to tune our interventions and tune our applications to people's specific personal needs. So I believe that by combining immersive virtual spaces with sensitive biofeedback especially, may be a way to move forward for mental health interventions. And my own doctoral research in this really focuses on looking at the potential of game-based biofeedback interventions for anxiety regulation, one example of which is DEEP. And I don't just want to know whether these type of tools can be effective, but also why they are effective and what changes when people interact with these type of applications. So I want to also look at the so-called mechanisms of change. But I want to take a step back first and looking at, okay, what is biofeedback and why do I think does it have so much potential? So biofeedback, in biofeedback, physiological changes are measured. This can be heart rate, can be breathing, can be brain activity, and they're always visualized in some way to the participants. So this can be by showing the raw signals, as you can see here in the top corner, but it can also be that they're displayed in changes in simple graphs or simple animations. And by showing these changes in our physiology, the aim is to make us more aware of what is happening inside of our body. And this is also known as interoceptive awareness. And biofeedback training then takes it a step further and is meant to really help us train to regulate our physiology in a way that improves our well-being. And this is often done by using things like operant learning, which includes feedback and reinforcement. So you can imagine, for instance, that you are participating in a biofeedback training session, and then once your physiology has reached the desired level of activity, you might hear, for instance, a pleasant sound that tells you that you're going in the right direction. And that makes you want to keep continuing on that path. It's also sometimes combined with relaxation techniques. So you can, for instance, do some breathing exercises while you are hooked up to this biofeedback. So you see what kind of effect these relaxation techniques have on your physiology. Biofeedback is not really a new thing, though. It's been around for actually quite a long time. I think even since the 70s or so. And we already know that using biofeedback can be effective for anxiety and stress regulation. However, it's never been really widely adopted yet in treatment. And that is because there were still some barriers associated with it, like very specific medical hardware that was needed and that was not really intuitive to work with, and high costs associated with this hardware. But it also required a very high time commitment from therapists to learn how to use this equipment. And also the training sessions themselves had a lot of repetitive trials that were needed to get to change. So you can imagine that, initially it might be very interesting to see your physiology change, but after a while, after going through multiple of these sessions, it might be very hard to stay motivated and to stay engaged, especially when you think about youth. Another problem is that a lot of these biofeedback training sessions were usually done when participants were in a neutral setting. However, it might be way more beneficial if you can create an environment where people feel very anxious or feel their arousal increase so that they can actively try to regulate it. And I think that is where there's a lot of potential for using virtual reality, to combine it with virtual reality and to use game design as a nice avenue forward. Especially now in these times when we have biosensors that are increasingly more accessible and way less hard to use. So by combining virtual reality with biofeedback and game design, we can provide people with an engaging and immersive and controllable environment where they can practice with anxiety regulation techniques in an intuitive and engaging manner. So when I started out with my research, I kind of started looking into the literature of what are the general things that make up why we think biofeedback is so effective for anxiety regulation. And these are kind of the things that you will see in there. So the idea is that biofeedback, with this feedback and these reinforcement techniques, will lead to an increased interoceptive awareness. So this awareness of your changes in your body, that it will make you able to better regulate your physiology, and that will lead to anxiety reductions. However, while going through the literature, I found out that there was actually a lot still unknown about the underlying mechanisms of change in biofeedback training. So what really makes it so effective, or what factors come into play to determine whether it's going to be a positive outcome or not. And especially there were a lot of gaps when it came to the psychological processes. So I won't go into detail for all of them, but one that I kind of want to highlight is, for instance, when you think about interoceptive awareness. We know that this is very important for us to be able to regulate our emotions, but just merely increasing this awareness might not always be good. So if I were to focus too much on my physiology at this moment, it would actually maybe only increase my anxiety, because I would interpret this, for instance, this beating in my chest or these my sweaty palms as an indication that something is going wrong. So in other words, the appraisal and interpretation of what we feel and whether we believe we can influence this really matters. So this is really something that we need to maybe take into account when we are using biofeedback. And so I identified some of these appraisal mechanisms that might be particularly important. An example is, for instance, self-efficacy, which is the belief in our own ability to deal with certain situations. Another is locus of control, which means that if you have, for instance, an internal locus of control, you believe that you yourself have the ability to change something about the situation that you're in or about your environment. Whereas if you have an external locus of control, this means that things are outside of your own control. And then there's the challenge appraisals, which are linked to this interpretation of arousal. So if we are in a very stressful situation and we feel our arousal increase, for instance, feel our heart beating, and then if we think that we don't have enough resources to deal with this, then we perceive this environment as a threat. However, if we do feel that we have enough resources to cope, we see this more as a challenge. So all of these different appraisal mechanisms we know already are very important for anxiety and anxiety treatment outcomes. You can imagine that some of these can be particularly addressed with biofeedback, because this feeling of control might change when you see this physiology change over time, and the way you interpret your arousal might also change. So it's very interesting to look at those mechanisms when you are working with biofeedback. And if mechanisms like these are identified, we can then tweak our biofeedback applications or training programs or video games even, so that they lead to lasting and adaptive changes in anxiety and stress reactivity. However, again, I kind of want to emphasize that no change is possible without people being engaged in your interventions and without people being motivated. And just by using video games, technology, or even biofeedback, it's still not a guarantee for engagement. And it's very important that with everything that we design, that a strong design framework is needed to see whether it fits with the needs of your users. So that's just kind of a word of caution there. So over the last 4 years, I have done a lot of research with DEEP, and to see whether we can use this as a tool for anxiety regulation. So we've done multiple studies with healthy samples, also samples with elevated anxiety symptoms, with younger children, but also with young adults. And in all of these studies, we wanted to see what changes occur as a result of playing with DEEP. For instance, what changes in terms of anxiety symptoms, what changes in terms of their physiology, so their breathing, their heart rate, and also what changes in these appraisal systems that I mentioned before. So for instance, the self-efficacy or this feeling of control. And then together with the game designers, we really wanted to also know, okay, what therapeutic techniques or game mechanics can we put into the game that can contribute and make it a more effective tool for anxiety regulation. So there's always a tight-knit collaboration to develop new prototypes that we could test. And I want to give you an example of one of the more recent studies that we performed, which was in a special education setting. So we had adolescents from special education with elevated anxiety symptoms that participated in 6 sessions with DEEP, and we compared them to a couple of sessions where they did not play DEEP in an experimental design such as this. And what we found there is that in the majority of individuals that engaged with DEEP, we found reductions in anxiety and even reductions in their disruptive classroom behavior on days where they played DEEP, as opposed to days where they did not play DEEP. And we also were able to tell that the relaxed state that people were in after they finished playing DEEP lasted for about 2 hours on average. So this was very promising results for us, and it kind of showed us how DEEP would behave in the wild in a practice setting like this. However, one of the more bigger studies and the most recent studies that we did was a randomized controlled trial with 112 undergraduate students with elevated anxiety symptoms. And they were randomly assigned to either 4 training sessions with Deep or a guided breathing smartphone application, which was our control group in this case. So there's a lot of smartphone applications like this available in the Google Play Store. This application did not use any biofeedback, so no input from physiology from the user. Also did not use any virtual reality. It was just an application, as you can see here in the bottom, where it guided you through a breathing exercise. So a bar went up when you needed to inhale, and a bar went down when you needed to exhale. So that was the application that we compared it with. So we measured anxiety symptoms at screening, before the training, after the training, and also 3 months later to see how long these effects would last. And then within the individual training sessions, we measured their state anxiety before and after they played to see whether they were more relaxed after playing. We measured their engagement, and we also measured several of these appraisal mechanisms that I mentioned before in each session. So I'm currently working, we're working very hard to write up these results so that they are published. But I'll give you a sneak peek already into the preliminary things that we found. So you are very lucky. So what we found so far is that there was a significant decrease in anxiety symptoms from before to after the training. And this decrease remained stable even until 3 months later. So it did not, the anxiety symptoms did not increase again after they stopped the training. So that was very nice to see. However, this was true for both the participants who played Deep, but also the ones that used the application. So in that regard, we saw similar effects. And we also saw that within these individual sessions that there was a significant decrease in anxiety from before to after each session, with the exception of exposure sessions of Deep, where they were practicing in a high arousal environment, which makes sense, that then they wouldn't be very relaxed. So even though in general we saw that both the people who played Deep and both the people who used this control application improved in terms of anxiety symptoms, when we took a closer look at these underlying mechanisms, which we know are so important for lasting changes, we saw that these changes were way more pronounced in the Deep group. So for instance, Deep users increased in self-efficacy, so this feeling of competence, and perceived resources to cope throughout the training. However, participants in the control group, so the ones who used the phone application, did not show these changes at all. So that was very interesting for us to see. And in general, we were able to show that higher self-efficacy, more internal control, and more perceived resources to cope were related to stronger decreases in state anxiety. So we know that we were able to show that these appraisal mechanisms really do matter for our ability to self-regulate our anxiety. So in conclusion, combining virtual reality, biofeedback, and game design might be a promising avenue for anxiety treatment. A psychological mechanism should be taken into account in testing and designing biofeedback interventions. A multidisciplinary collaboration and a strong design framework are also essential to facilitate engagement and to achieve lasting and adaptive changes. So what's next? Well, for Deep, Owen mentioned already a bit of what is in the future, but more research results are coming. There will be an Oculus Quest release soon. After that, we might be able to start implementation trials with care partners. And the designers, of course, are working hard to expand the Deep universe. As for myself, I'm very busy working at trying to complete my dissertation at this moment. But after I finish, I really hope that I'll be able to continue to work in a field where I can combine science, healthcare, and game design and technological innovation. And I want to keep on working on interactive and playful experiences that contribute to a better understanding of human behavior and that can improve our mental health. And finally, I would like to leave you all with a couple of calls to action. Specifically for scientists, but also everyone else, I guess, don't be afraid to step outside of your ivory tower. Try to work in multidisciplinary teams and diverse teams as much as possible, because it will open many doors. Don't forget to co-design with your end users as much as possible. And then I would like to challenge you all, finally, by thinking about the ways that we can shape mental health interventions of the future and the way that we can shape technological developments. So think about how can we use immersive virtual spaces, biosensors, and personalized design to improve our social, emotional, and mental well-being in a playful and meaningful way. That's where I'll end. Thank you all for your attention. And this is all where you can contact us and find us.
That's insane. On a very, very personal note, to the two of you, thank you so much for your work, because I grew up in Germany in the 80s and 90s as an undiagnosed ADHD kid. And I basically self-treated myself with playing Wolfenstein 3D, not only just for kind of letting out some kind of historical kind of anger, but also just because it helped me calm down. And nobody back then could understand, oh, how can you play these kind of games and actually it calms you? Well, it's my chemical makeup that is doing that. So I think the work that you two are doing is so important. And so if there are any money bags in the audience, please throw the money at Joanneke and Owen, please. But
we'd love to use the resources of the community to deploy meaningful work in effective ways.
Yeah.
Yes, good. It's the through line that we found during all these talks that we had in the last couple of days was that the combination of science and art/design has been very, 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 very important in actually designing and making these kind of VR experiences and forays into what should come next. So hearing that again and seeing both a creator and also a scientist, and I guess the lines are blurring there as well, kind of like scientists also kind of become creators and designers become scientists in a way. So what I would like to know is, so where do you see VR going in the next couple of kind of, or where would you like to see VR going, or maybe immersive media in the future? And I'm just throwing that out there, just as an open question.
Joe, do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, I really hope that we can continue to explore ways in which we can share these virtual spaces together with other people, and that we can share it in a meaningful way, that we can heal and learn from each other together. Also, I really wonder how much, for instance, more augmented reality is going to take over, so that it's kind of becoming more and more a mix between overlaying a digital world with the real world, so that you can interact with each other in that way, still see each other in real life, but then interact in that way. And yeah, like I said, I really hope that people will continue to kind of experiment with other ways that we can interact with virtual reality. So whether that is by doing some biofeedback in there, but also ways to interact, like I think a lot of things are being done, for instance, on touch, which I think is very important and is actually kind of been underrated a lot, and also games and other areas as well. So that is something I would be interested with. And yeah, but I really, the social aspect is something that I would really like to see expanded a bit more on.
Yeah, I very much agree with Joe there. Like, the things that excite me most about the kind of VR and immersive realms are the social experiences, the ability to facilitate connection in ways that are not possible in the real world. That could be everything from the fact that, humans live far apart from each other or can't meet up for any other reason, to being able to have experiences that are not possible in the real world. Things that I'm excited about developing is like everything from just virtual reality tourism, to be able to tour the amazing places of the world, whether it's the deep ocean or ancient monuments, or even to be able to travel backwards in time to walk around the streets of ancient Damascus and like feel what it feels like to be there. That would be just wonderful. Other things that interest me are obviously like the therapeutic aspects. I'm interested in working with that further and seeing more kind of things there, developing ways to interact on a kind of focus level at different sides of your personalities and different aspects of your character to be able to directly interact with, you know, traumas or needs or things like that in a way that is helpful to people is something that really, really interests me. And then finally, like, is productivity. The project that I work with, the biologists on the cancer project, leans into this, but seeing more things that allow people to create music and art and all sorts of different things collaboratively in three-dimensional virtual spaces, not held back by, you know, the laws of physics. I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that virtual reality is still, you know, it's not as accessible as we would like it to be. You still need to have a level of wealth and resources to access this stuff. And hopefully that will change. Hopefully it will become more accessible and more broadly available, either through services like public libraries or the cheapening of this technology. But once humans do have access to it, it means that we can have access to a vast array of experiences and spaces in the same way that the internet allowed everybody who had access to it to have access to vast quantities of information. I'm hoping that virtual reality will allow people to have access to vast swathes of experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Sorry, I'm just saying that there's a question from chat from Peter, which kind of goes into the same kind of direction that you were just going into, Owen. Which boundaries do you see that we'll need to tackle to make the potentials of VR more popular and accessible? And Joanneke, maybe you have ideas there?
Well, yeah, we already see that there's different ways of accessibility, I guess. So, like Owen mentioned, there's of course the costs that are still related to it, but also I'm thinking about accessible in ways of, you know, just how easy it is to use. So we've already seen, of course, very great developments in there. So whereas previously you had like maybe a huge backpack on with the computer in it, or you had all of these cables still attached with the Vive, whereas now you have the Oculus Quest, where it's just in one headset. It's more and more easy to use, but so that is another way of accessibility. But I think still a lot can be done in terms of how different types of people can interact with it. So, you know, if you're not that able to move your head, can you still be in VR? Is there different ways to do it? Also, maybe if you're not really able to see that well, maybe VR can still in some way have a way to provide an immersive auditory experience. So, and that accessibility I think would be interesting. But yeah, to make things more and more accessible and maybe also open source. So also in terms of development, that things are just maybe becoming more available there, that people can help create the things that they would like in their VR experience themselves, and that communities can come together to create that. I think that would be interesting, but yeah, I think Owen might have some ideas on that as well.
I mean, like what I've already talked about in terms of having municipal VR accessible through public schools, hospitals, libraries, and those kind of spaces, I think is a really, really important step.
Yeah.
The technology getting cheaper. I mean, one of the problems that I have with virtual reality at the moment is that so much of it is in the hands of American corporations, which hold such strange values. Like, it's bizarre to me that I can make an experience where I can shoot a human body in the face and have it bleed in front of me, but I can't have a naked human body there because that's distasteful. I think that's a very strange and bizarre level of standards to have, that the people who currently make decisions about what is and is not allowed on the platform hold. And I'd love to see some diversity there in terms of what people will publish and platform. And that's just one example. I think, yeah, that some work needs to be done on the decisions we make of what art and experiences are right for us to have as a species. And then finally, just making it cheaper. and we know that this technology will get cheaper because every technology gets cheaper, and that will be great, hopefully.
Yeah. Coming back to the open source kind of aspect of it, like me and Debbie in our kind of art practice, we use Blender, and the only reason we were able to actually make VR experiences was that the game engines have started to become freely available at the point of entry, at least. So like Unity being free to download and free to use on a personal level. Same with Unreal, and the Godot engine being completely open source. So yeah, but hopefully there's going to be some development there as well. I've seen there's a question from the chat as well regarding the price. Rockefeller gave away the lamps for free to sell the oil for it later. Wouldn't it be possible for VR as well? Seems like
that may already be happening in VR. Like, we know that with the exception of Nintendo, certainly the PlayStation and the Xbox is sold as at a loss. Every time you buy a PlayStation, Sony loses money, and they recoup that as you purchase games over your time with the system. I'm not sure what the exact economics is of Oculus's one or Valve's one, if they are making a loss on the hardware. I would say it will move in that direction as more titles become available and as we see those attachment rates kind of go up.
Yeah, that's probably true. I think that's why game engines kind of went the free route as well, just to try and pull in more developers, just to get more content out there. I think especially Oculus has been giving out like membership to the kind of Oculus Start kind of developer fund as well. So me and Debbie have been sent like an Oculus Go and a Rift to develop on for free, which was nice. And I think that's kind of like almost going into that kind of direction. Yeah, I think that really needs to happen. And in regards to schools, I completely 100% agree. Schools need to start teaching these kind of things. I'm still amazed that game engines haven't made it into schools yet. Like for kind of teaching physics even, or any kind of that kind of stuff.
For me, like, I only really got my head around mathematics when I started programming video games. Like, when you have to, and this is for my neurology, like the ability to apply a theory in a kinesthetic way where you can see the results of it straight away is what I needed to really understand all of this geometry stuff and trigonometry stuff. And yeah, that's a really like a first day use case for bringing games and engines into school. That feels like the first one for me, but it can be applied in every subject I can think of, really. Having played, not just, and it's very important to me that like this work is framed not as a technology work, but really within this sphere of play, which is like one of the most ancient forms of human culture. All types of games, whether they're playground games or computer games or virtual reality games, or indeed my beloved board games, have a role to play in education, not just for children, but perhaps more critically for us as adults as well.
Joanneke, in your research, how has getting into VR, has that changed the way you approach your research as well? Has that had like a day-to-day impact on how you conduct research and also how you maybe prototype things or test things?
I think it wasn't necessarily VR only, but just using any form of, other than traditional experimental task design things. It's just something that a lot of us scientists are really not familiar with, or at least also not in the social sciences, at least, maybe to some extent you have a little task that you have on the computer, but really stepping outside of your boundaries and interacting with, designers and artists and stuff like that. It's still something that's pretty strange and alien to a lot of people. And also when an issue that's, for instance, there in, so I've based most of my dissertation on this, and most of my doctoral research on conducting projects like this. But output in a scientific way is usually focused on, papers and scientific publications. And it's not so much measured in the impact of, developing something like this that may have an impact in a different way. So you're putting in a lot of this additional effort that in your core being might have way more impact and be way more relevant, but it's not really, it's not really rewarded a lot. Like stepping outside of the boundaries is not really rewarded. So you really need to, know for certain that, this is something that you want to consider. And even mentioning the idea of, maybe being able to commercialize therapeutic games in any way, just to have them available to buy for people. Like, even if you mention commercialization, everyone's like, oh yeah, but how can you then still remain your scientific integrity and things like that? It's still pretty hard to break through. But it wasn't necessarily VR, I guess, that made it complicated, except for maybe some practical things in terms of, testing, and that you need to know how it works and interact with your participants. But it's more sort of general thing around it, which is that it's, a lot of science is still, at least in social science, is still new to adapting these type of methods.
Yeah, which kind of leads us to the question from chat, kind of very nicely, which is, how would you motivate persons who are afraid of new experiences, such as some researchers or kind of funders, to try out VR? So how to lower psychological barriers? Oh
yeah,
my.
this is it's very interesting. you want to?
The first and most important thing to say is that you shouldn't pressure people into doing things that they don't want to do. And that's like the baseline for any of these answers. And I think it's really important on every level of our human interactions that we remember that. But at the same time, like so what we can do for people who are curious but nervous is to have ways for them to view the work in a safe way that's safe for them. We need to listen to them and understand their concerns, first and foremost. Something is ringing. I don't know if it's me. No, it's not me. We need to listen and understand their concerns first and foremost. And then if they do make a choice by themselves to try the thing, we need to have a safe place for them to do that. It's only a small thing, but the thing that annoys me most about VR stuff is that as soon as somebody puts them on, everybody whips out their phone and starts filming them without asking them if it's okay. And that kind of weird culture around VR, I think, is really damaging. And people should stop filming other people in VR without asking them if it's okay first.
Yeah. And I think this is interesting, especially also when you think about, research and participation in research. And, you really have to make sure that it's also, even though, you know that you only have a specific amount of time with someone, and you know that you need to get data of it. Like Owen said, you need to, first and foremost, understand that this is just a human being and not a research participant as a, with just a data number. And that you kind of, you really explain well what is going to happen, and you explain that they can get out at any moment. A build-up is also very important, that they're just not dropped in. So if I know that someone is nervous already from the get-go, I might say, okay, well, maybe you just look at it and don't move yet or something. Or maybe I'll just stay next to you and you can, hold my arm and you know that I'm still here, just making these very small adaptations. But also, I guess when you are creating it, it might be interesting to have a ramp up in the experience itself, so that you're not dropped in it immediately, but it kind of builds up a little bit. And yeah, it's very interesting. The downside to that is, when I go out, for instance, and demo it at places, you only have a very, very small amount of time with someone to have them experience it. You can't really take a lot of time with everyone, so that's sometimes frustrating to have to deal with, and try to at least not forget. Keep reminding yourself that this might be the first time that someone experiences this, and maybe sitting down might be better for them. That they don't really stand up and don't know where they are. You know, little things that you can do, and just explain as much as possible and listen to their worries. Yeah.
Yeah, when like the VR art that me and Debbie have been exhibiting publicly, like we always kind of thought about the art piece as just on the top level as a 3-act thing. So the first act is outside of VR, kind of getting into VR. Then there's the VR experience, and then there's also the getting out of VR experience as well, which we found a lot of people are orientated getting out of VR, and you kind of almost need to kind of decompress them a little bit before letting them back into the real world. So yes, I can mirror that kind of like from experience. People need kind of like a lead in and a lead out. I've got another question here from chat, which is kind of quite specific to Germany as well, because the health insurance here is not giving any kind of funding to VR or that kind of research or kind of treatment. How could we motivate the public health system to finance more of the research and projects? Yeah, please come up with a solution in one sentence, and then we'll apply that to the whole of Germany right now. Please, please do.
Yeah. I mean, I would be very happy to hear some things. I mean, in general, I guess it will help that more and more we're able to also show some evidence behind it, because a lot of it usually wasn't there. It was just, okay, we make something and we don't have any idea of the actual efficacy of them. So that might help a little bit. But also, I guess it usually it always kind of is based on money as well. So if you're able to kind of show in the long run how this will be able to lower the burden on the healthcare system, then they might be, more open to onboarding for this. But then you really need to dive into that, and as for instance, me as a scientist, I'm really not that motivated to look into the financial side, even though that it's very important to look at and to do those type of analyses. But if you have people that are willing to do that for you, to kind of see what the cost benefits of it are, things like that might help. But yeah, I've been trying to motivate a lot of people just by showing them a lot of examples and by talking about it, and hoping that at least also with some scientific evidence that people will slowly change their opinion.
Yeah, we had a talk earlier as part of the kind of VR strand as well, between two people I know back from Scotland who have been working as kind of like cultural community makers. So it's basically people, Janine Matheson and Stacey Hunter, who have been kind of like their job was to point out people and try to lobby for them. So I completely agree with you, Joanneke. It shouldn't be your job to lobby for it, because you do the research for it and you do it well. So please keep doing that. And Owen is very good at obviously designing and making art around that. So also he shouldn't be lobbying. So so any lobbyists out there, get in touch.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another question from Lily from chat. Is Deep suitable to use for somebody with no VR experience?
Hey, Lily.
Well, almost everyone in my sorry, you want to say something, Owen?
No, you can go ahead.
Almost everyone that was participating in, for instance, my studies, there were very little amount of people that already had extensive experience with VR. So most people that I encountered were, new to it, or maybe the only thing that they had experiences was maybe with the phone-based ones on their head. So it is possible, but again, it might not be nice for everyone. So some people are maybe more sensitive to VR sickness and stuff like that, or they don't connect with it, and that's fine. And you need to respect that, and if that's not happening, then you can pull them out. But I think it's definitely suitable. But I guess we're also working a bit more into kind of make the experience, the onboarding, a bit more smooth as well with me, so that they're not dropped in the middle. But yeah, I don't know what you think about this, Owen.
Yeah, no, I think it absolutely is suitable for people with no experience. Like, not just with no experience of virtual reality, but we've had people who've had no experience of video games play it as well. It's good if people have had at least some level of contact with video games, but you know, this work has been played by a woman in her 80s in Leipzig when it was being shown at the festival there. It's been played by my own mother, who's certainly not had much experience to video games and no experience of virtual reality. When we took it to Shanghai in China, it was played by a number of Buddhist monks who live in monasteries over there. It's been, and I'm not suggesting that when they grow up they didn't necessarily have access to video games, but yeah, it's been deployed across all sorts of different populations and backgrounds and age groups, and having tried virtual reality before is not a prerequisite to enjoy it or get the benefits of it whatsoever.
No, and also interesting in terms of the nausea that a lot of people experience with VR. Like in the measurements that we've had so far with all of the studies that we did, is actually fairly low. Like not a lot of people have.
Yeah, we've always had very low noise.
Yeah, which I guess is also being tied back to the fact that you're using breathing as your way to move forward, which can kind of alleviate this nausea, but also that you're still kind of centered in your breathing and centered in yourself. So yeah, not saying that
that's the mechanism also. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Like I suspect that's the mechanism that allows for people, because we've had the strange thing that even from the Oculus Rift 1, which was running off a terrible laptop at a horrific frame rate, we had very, very, very low reports of nausea, and people who weren't able to play any other VR stuff were able to play ours. And I suspect that mechanism is the fact that we're constantly bringing their focus and attention back to their body in a way that is helpful, because we're doing lots of things that we shouldn't be doing. Like we're like moving people at varied accelerations, and we're giving people, you know, there's times in deep where you are floating above, like high above a floor below you, which in most other experiences would be terrifying. And still people can get a bit nervous the first time, but then they love it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. It's like coming back to the body, because that's what we kind of love about VR as well, because it allows you. So for one, the controller is kind of your body, and we all kind of know our body as a controller of our kind of brain and consciousness, I guess, in a way. So kind of using as much of that as possible is really, really nice for especially people who are not. So if you're kind of familiar with your body in some kind of way, then probably VR is okay for you if done kind of correctly and with the correct markers. There's one strange example for, like, we had a show in Glasgow once where we made an experience where you were looking down an abyss. So it was quite kind of stereotypical, kind of look down the abyss kind of thing, and try to see if people feel kind of dizzy. But when we tested it ourselves, and I stepped onto kind of the ledge, I didn't feel anything. For me, the whole thing kind of completely fell flat, up until the point when we actually modeled like a barrier in front of the ledge. So my brain had to see a ledge and then kind of think, oh, somebody built that ledge there for me not to fall over. And suddenly I was afraid of stepping towards the ledge. And I actually felt kind of like the vertigo that we were kind of intending for people to feel. So there's a nice kind of connection between brain-body kind of distortion that VR kind of is very, very suitable for.
It's fascinating. And even the way just working in VR or playing with VR makes you think about your own consciousness and the way our brains process information is like one of the really fun side effects of being in this space.
Yeah, even like we've built the Mozilla Hub space for the Waterkant Festival for people to watch the live stream in. And earlier today we had Dr. Julie Williamson, who's doing some research on socializing in VR and how people present themselves and who they actually are. And just for the Waterkant Festival itself, like Tim Logan, who's one of the organizers, he's just kind of like giddy with excitement just seeing his own hands in VR, and he starts dancing. I've never seen him dancing before, and I don't want to see him dance ever again. But in VR, it's good. So, okay. Here's another question regarding deep. How long would a typical session last in deep?
We've made a variety of lengths of experiences from, a few minutes up into about 20 minutes. My dream is to make a version of it that lasts for over an hour. That's probably far away and would require us to find significant support from somebody to do that. But that's what I'd really like to do. What we're aiming for at the moment with the home version is to begin with at launch, like a 10-minute experience that then ends in a group shared experience that can go on for as long as you want it to. And after launch, we will be releasing like several other spaces and experiences within that.
Yeah, that sounds like a really clever idea to actually kind of make it kind of loop back to a social experience after kind of like calming down, to be able to share your kind of like impressions and things like that. I quite like that. That's a really good idea. I'm gonna steal that. Let me just write that down. No.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, I'm not very good at stealing. Okay, I think we've got about 10 minutes left in the discussion. So just to make you aware, if you've got any kind of information you definitely want to drop before we kind of go to an end. Otherwise, we'll just keep talking normally, like normal human beings.
Yeah, I'd like to invite people to come to our website, which is exploredeep.com. There you'll be able to sign up for our newsletter if you want to stay up to date on when this will be coming to Quest and different festival appearances that it will be making. We also are on Instagram, and if people want to follow us there, I should actually find out what it is.
I think it's also Explore Deep, but you'll just check. At least on Twitter, it is at Explore Deep as well.
So Explore Deep _VR.
Or for Instagram. Yeah.
And yeah, say hi. Let us know what you're excited about or what would like to see in the project. If people have festivals close to them that they think the work would be a good fit for, we'd love to hear about that. And yeah, we're looking for partners and support to like expand out this work and be able to deploy it more broadly to people. Yeah, I also want to call out the amazing work done on audio by Andy Mooney, and that's such a big part of the experience that I think is really key to bringing people into their body and the efficacy of the piece, as well as the amazing work done by our producer Sarah Tycho and in the help of bringing us to new spaces and introducing us to so many other wonderful people.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess if you want to know other ways in which video games can be used for mental health, but also, for instance, smoking, stuff like that, we have on the lab website, GEMH-lab. This is GEMH-lab.com. So we have all of the projects that we are working on there, and we're always happy to collaborate with more people and to see how we can, design more awesome, playful projects that can help our mental health and other issues as well. And yeah, I'm also on Twitter as well.
What's your handle?
It's at Joanneke, but instead of a J, it's a Y.
Okay, I think somebody will post that in chat, hopefully. Otherwise, we'll definitely share in chat as well. Again, for me, this is
right.
that nice one. Why don't you have that, Owen? Look at Joanneke being very good at marketing.
I'm not a professional at Joanneke. That's the reason why.
His Twitter handle
questions
is on it.
that begin with why Owen.
Good.
Yeah.
But once again, no, I'm really thankful that you two have agreed to do this. By the way, you've done this without any kind of payment, and we not even said thank you enough, I think. But no, it's a topic that is both for me and Debbie very close to our hearts as long-time sufferers from being in this world, late-stage capitalism, which we all share together, and hopefully we get through okay. I think there are a lot of things that can make you hopeful nowadays. Although it might seem scary at first, but I think kind of like as you mentioned as well, the protests have shown that like change is possible and it's happening. Very good. Yeah, Black lives do matter. Do take care of your mental health. If you are feeling unwell, do not blame yourself. It is the world that is quite taxing. So do seek help if you need help. If you feel lost, do talk to people. Don't try to become an introvert and not talk to people, which is my mistake that I've done for about 20 years. And now Debbie is forcing me to talk to people through video screens like this. So I'm still practicing. So yeah, thank you so much. And I hope to hear from you soon.
To the stuff that you said there of like incorporating playfulness and joy and pleasure into your life. Like, we've been conditioned and taught to think of these things as frivolous and unimportant and even tawdry or distasteful. But we need to do the important work that is happening and must continue to happen with deconstructing like the systems of authority that are oppressing so many of our people. But we also need to experience pleasure and joy and playfulness. And that pleasure and joy and playfulness can be a part of that deconstruction, but also the restoration of it. Like the people who are out at the front lines of these demonstrations around the world, doing the hard work of raising this awareness, the people who are on the front lines of the pandemic, treating people with the disease, it's important that when they come home, that they can have pleasure and joy and playfulness. And that's a part it's important and it has value, and we should exaltate it more in our society.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree, Owen.